Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Sam Cheung. I'm an elder at IBCBI, and I was talking to Eric and thinking that we could, in the services, have somebody do a short testimony. And so, obviously, Eric came back to me and said, "Why don't you start?" Which is fair. So I'm gonna try and keep this short and try and do this off script, which is unusual for me. So I grew up in a Christian family. That's not unusual, and certainly I don't take that for granted. I think that those people who have come to faith later in their life, not having grown in a Christian family, have a harder route to knowing God and knowing God's love. But if you know me, then you know that all the way along I will question myself. And as somebody who loves fantasy stories, I loved the Bible when I was a kid. I loved the amazing stories. My parents, and especially my mum, made sure that we went to the Chinese church in London, and I was well churched. So I was the kind of kid who had all of the answers, and knew the right ways to talk about, to answer the Bible study leaders, etc., etc. So, but I grew pretty tired of that, and again, I would say that by the age of about 10, 11, I was certainly drifting away in the opposite direction, and certainly living much more of a selfish, sinful life. I think that was probably the worst time in my life in terms of drifting away from God's intent for my life. Certainly swearing and stealing and doing plenty of things that I wasn't proud of. When I was about 12, I remember that there was a particularly difficult passage of my life. I mean, this is obviously, how difficult can it get for a 12-year-old? But emotionally, I was very, very angry. My academics were suffering. I was facing some bullying and also, in turn, doing some bullying myself. And I think I remember crying out to God for help, and it all clearing up after my prayers within a day or so, and feeling an incredible amount of peace. Now, this is interesting because I may have called myself a Christian at the time, but looking back, I would say that I wasn't a Christian. But I certainly, at this point, I looked back at my life and I thought, I didn't suddenly, I wasn't convinced by that one incident. I looked back and I saw that this was not the first time. And I became convinced that God there was a God, and there was a God who answered prayers. And from everything I knew, and I knew a certain amount about other religions as well, and continued to learn about those and other faiths, etc. But I became fairly convinced that it was the Christian God, and continued to grow in that understanding. It wasn't until I was about 15, I was then going along to a youth group in the Chinese church, and I went away for a Easter conference. There is great value, I believe, in giving children that safe Christian environment to hear the unfiltered Christian message, and I think that helped me incredibly. So, so that they can find that and explore that for themselves, and not have the clutter of the secular kind of agenda that keeps on going. The children are exposed to. So I do encourage you to send your children to children's camps. But I was actually chosen to be a Christian, one of the the group leaders. And this was interesting because certainly I wouldn't have called myself a Christian at the time. And even though I was convinced that the Christian God exists, I kept on hearing all these testimonies about people being converted and these wonderful experiences that people had. And I think that I was looking for that for myself. And I remember that the moment that I became a Christian, it was actually during a music session, worship session, and I stopped with a realization. And for me, this was important for me, and I think everyone has their own journey, and God reaches out to everyone in their own way, but this was important to me, that it was not an emotional experience. It was not an emotional response. It was a logical realization that God had been there all along. Like He answered my prayers, He had been there all along. And certainly I've shared this image before, that I was like a child, like a little child. And there's all of these toys and these, these cuddly bears and things, these things that I want to play with. And my Father, God, was holding out His hand and calling my name. Holding out His hand and calling my name, and all I had to do was reach back out and hold His hand. And obviously there are things that we want to kind of hold on to, and we have to realize that we have to give up. We look down at the fun things, the toys, etc., the things on this earth, the things that perhaps don't honor God. And our Father who loves us, we know He loves us, is holding out His hand. And we have to drop those things. But all we have to do is accept that and reach out our hand and take that hand. You see, God is doing all the hard work. He is the one who calls us. He is the one who reaches out His hand to us. And all we have to do is accept that. Now, that doesn't mean I understood what it meant to be a Christian, and over the next couple of years, I have various other stories of various landmarks, for example, where I went along to this Bible study, and mostly because I was interested, because my girlfriend was there, and I was more interested in spending time with her than going along to the Bible study. But the Bible study leader challenged me, and he said, do you think you're going to heaven? And I said, I think so. And then he said, look down at the passage. What does the passage say? He's like, yes, I think I'm going to heaven. And so I didn't realize until that was a year later, I think, 16, I didn't and he really challenged me on that. He said, are you going to heaven? And so I didn't realize about this assurance of salvation until a year after I became a Christian. I think that the step to becoming a Christian for me was to realize that God is there, but also to devote my life to Him, to give my life over to Him, to accept His salvation. Knowing what it means to be a Christian helps. Knowing that as a Christian I am accepted into His family, and I have that assurance of salvation. Understanding the peace that comes with it came later as well. Understanding what it means to be part of this loving family, and that we are His witnesses, His salt and light on this earth. This is something I'm still learning and understanding, and we are all flawed and failed and human and sinful, and we continue to be. Certainly, I can continue to tell you about that, and hopefully in my sermons I bring that across, that I'm far from perfect. But it is that first step, I think, that you take where I realized that God was calling me and holding out His hand, that all I have to do is reach out my hand and accept it. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope, do feel free to ask me questions at any time, but I hope that helps.